Hello, this is a homily for the 22nd Sunday of the year. And as you know, during these so-called ordinary Sundays, we are being instructed in the spirituality of the Christian life. These are all the different insights and behaviors that we need to develop in our lives so that we become more and more profound, loving followers of Jesus Christ. The first reading is taken from the book of Sirach. It's also known as the book of Ecclesiasticus, from the word for church, because again, it's a way of saying what Sirach is saying is a good way to be a member of the church, at least in terms of the moral component. So you have here, my child, conduct your affairs with humility. And that basically sets the whole tone for the readings. Now, what is important here is not to stay with the idea of humility as a sheer act of will. I am going to impose on myself some kind of humility in an abstract sense, and that's going to make me humble. This is not an I operation. This is, the insight in this is given to us in the gospel acclamation, which is taken from Matthew 11, where Jesus says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart." So it's not me and my concept of what humility is that is operating here. What's operating here is Jesus' humility, and don't forget, this is the one who is God and who has humbled himself to become a man. Here you have him explaining that his humility involves a yoke. It involves being constrained by essentially Christian teaching so that we become meek and humble, in his words, as he is. And so it's a very personal following of a personal Jesus that we are learning here. This is not some abstract concept of ethics that we're learning from a Greek philosopher, although some Greek philosophers had pretty good understandings of humility. But it's the personal following of the personal Jesus that is crucial to our really grasping what God means by humility. Now, in Sirach, you have this injunction, conduct your affairs with humility, and you'll be loved more than a giver of gifts. This idea of humility is actually very central to most of the things that we understand as being Christian. It's fundamental, it's kind of the doorway to understanding a lot of other things. If we're humble, we understand what it means to go to Mass. If we're humble, we understand what it means to love our neighbor. If we're humble, it means we understand what it means to conduct our business affairs with honor. And so what you have here is a series of injunctions about humility. Humble yourself, the more the greater you are. And you can see this in remarkable people. I was just in the house of General George C. Marshall the other day, and it's very apparent very quickly that this man operated with an amazing sense of humility. Even when he became a 5-star general, even when he became Secretary of State, even when he ran the Marshall Plan. So what you have is somebody actually living out the idea of humility in very complex affairs, and, not surprisingly, succeeding in an amazing way in what he sets out to do. In the responsorial psalm, God, in your goodness, you have made a home for the poor. Here's the beginning of the problem with the Christian understanding of humility. It's somehow connected with the poor. And this is very frustrating for a lot of Catholics, because we want to keep the poor at a certain distance. We'll sign a check, that's not a problem, but we're certainly not going to spend time talking to a poor person, or better helping a poor person, or better giving them food, or inviting them into our home, and so on and so on and so on. Humility and poverty are very closely tied together. Anyway, there's a lot more about God as being humble, God as being the father of orphans, the defender of the widows. And this is God in his holy place. In other words, this is the real sense of divinity that we should be working with, because we are trying to copy the divinity, essentially. When we say we're following Christ, we're copying the divinity in some sense. And here you have God who showers down a bountiful rain, restores the land when it languished. In your goodness, O God, last line, you provided for the needy. And you know from other places, those who care for the poor, they cover a multitude of sins. There's something incredibly special about the poor all the way through the Old Testament, all the way through the New Testament. And the church, as the Catholic Church, we're not looking at the other churches now, has done amazing things to care for the poor. That doesn't mean to say that all Catholics have cooperated and gotten into the business of caring for the poor. That's embarrassing, but it's true, and you can check the texts to see who does the care for the poor. Sometimes it's lay people, sometimes it's religious, sometimes it's clergy, but it's not all lay people, it's not all religious, and it's not all clergy. And this, again, is embarrassing if we truly say we're following a God who is humble and who cares for the poor. In the second reading, which is taken from a letter to the Hebrews, the author is trying to give us a sense of the majesty of God so that we appreciate how small we are. There's a lot more in that text, but we'll leave that for another time. I've talked about the gospel acclamation. Lastly, in the gospel, you have Jesus in the house of a leading Pharisee. So one of the major religious public figures, and Jesus feels pressed to teach them a parable. And he develops a parable about people choosing the places of honor at table. And how, be careful, because somebody more important than you may have been invited, and you may be asked to move down the table so this person can sit in the place of honor. Very crucial for our personal sense of who we are. But there's a twist at the end when he goes to explain when you are invited, when you hold a lunch or a dinner. This is him talking to his own host now. Do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your wealthy neighbors, in case they may invite you back, and you have repayment. Go instead and invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. Blessed will you be, because they can't repay you, and you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. A lot to think about. Have a good day.